Hey there, folks. I'm Mark, in affiliation with Spectrum Pulse, and it's Billboard Breakdown.
I don't remember.
You know, I normally like to praise weeks coming off of massive album bombs, especially heading into a summer lull, which, at least for me, I felt like I could really use. But this is one of those cases where I have concerns about what might be flooding in to replace Tyler, the Creator, and Doja Cat, because while there's some promise, well, okay, we'll get to it. But let's start off with our top 10. Yes, Butter by BTS is still at number 1 thanks to pretty much sales alone. We have heard this story. But now we have an interesting conundrum with BTS also releasing Permission to Dance, which might wind up splitting the attention of audiences next week. I don't really foresee a big drop-off, but given that radio and streaming have stalled out, I would argue this song is more vulnerable than you might think. And Good For You by Olivia Rodrigo is in prime position to take the top spot beyond number 2. The sales might be a bit down, but streaming, surging radio, they have her in prime position to capitalize on any weakness. Now this place is Levitating by Dua Lipa featuring DaBaby, once again in an awkward spot, rising back to number 3 even as the radio staggers and sales are down, but the streaming is up, although with her team now starting to throw promo behind Love Again, I can imagine this song's time has really passed. And really, its gain was more thanks to Kiss Me More slipping back from the album boost down to number 4, even as the streaming and radio remain strong. Then as I predicted, Montero, Call Me By Your Name by Lil Nas X saw a bunch of songs fall past it as its radio and streaming remain pretty stable to push it back to number 5, but where things get a little bit more interesting come with Bad Habits by Ed Sheeran slipping down to number 6 despite being strong on all channels, and where Billboard put forward a new rules change. In short, they changed the tracking week from radio from Monday to Sunday to Friday to Thursday, to bring it in line with how they track streaming and sales, which might not seem like a huge change, except by doing it like this, when a song gets a prime radio deal, it's captured within the same week of release for Billboard tracking purposes. So for a song like Bad Habits, where Atlantic is throwing the kitchen sink at the radio for promotion, this probably would have debuted higher. Maybe not challenged for number 1, but it might have been significantly closer. What's important to highlight here is who benefits from this. Established radio acts who can synchronize their sales, streaming, and airplay promotion for a big chart debut. In other words, my guess is Republic, Atlantic, and probably especially Interscope saw the sales gimmickry of the past month from Columbia, and then likely put some pressure on Billboard because they're sick of having their A-list acts not debut or chart as high as they could. And given that Columbia's roster aren't guaranteed immediate radio traction out of the gate, even for some of their pop acts, let alone crossover, because this label can be really slow to work a record on the radio, this could be big trouble. And you wonder why I don't take Billboard all that seriously when they do this nonsense. I can see the label politics playing out in real time. Anyway, this moved over to the last 4 songs that are mostly in the same sort of decay or heading out. Leave the Door Open by Silk Sonic at number 7, especially with the radio and freefall. Peaches by Justin Bieber featuring Daniel Caesar and Giveon at number 8 for pretty much the exact same reason, just with weaker sales and streaming. Save Your Tears by The Weeknd and Ariana Grande, which is at number 9 and actually slowing down in its radio collapse. And Deja Vu by Olivia Rodrigo at number 10, which actually is not collapsing at all, but it's got some good streaming, but it really needs to narrow that radio margin to make up for its absolutely pitiful sales. Anyway, our losers and dropouts this week, which were pretty much dominated by Tyler, the Creator, and Doja Cat, but hey, they managed to knock out Almost Maybes by Jordan Davis as well, short of making a year-end list for 2021, so I'm not complaining. And you know, speaking of Tyler and Doja Cat, they pretty much fill out the majority of our losers here too. From Tyler we had Was Your Name with Young Boy Never Broke Again and Ty Dolla $ign at 44, and Juggernaut with Lil Uzi Vert and Pharrell at 99. And from Doja Cat we had Ain't Shit at 41 and Need to Know at 64. Also AM from Neo Garcia, J Balvin, and Bad Bunny fell off the debut to 57, and Gone by Dierks Bentley continues on its way out at 48. It looks to be fading out naturally, and will likely leave the chart soon, just shy of any sort of year-endless spot. But that means our gains and our returns flooded in, not exactly for the better in either category, I should add. Like in the latter category, we might have gotten Enough For You by Olivia Rodrigo back at 98, and Outside by Mo and OG Bobby Billions at 92, and My Boy by LV Shane at 88, but it came with All I Know So Far by Pink at 96, and What's Next by Drake at 97, and Tell 'Em by Cochise and Snot at 100. But we got a lot more gains this week, and let's start out with some of our recoveries. Tombstone by Rod Wave at 85, Come Through by Her featuring Chris Brown at 79, Jealousy Jealousy by Olivia Rodrigo at 78, along with Favorite Crime at 52, and Things a Man Ought to Know by Lainey Wilson at 51. Then there are the songs that are catching a brief break in order to fill in the gaps, and that's certainly a mixed bag. Twerkulator by City Girls at 80, Follow You by Imagine Dragons at 77, You by Regard, Troye Sivan and Tate McRae at 60, Arcade by Duncan Lawrence at 58, and Way Less Sad by AJR at 54. But then off the debut, we had Beggin' by Mainskin up to 46. I'd rather prefer this not become a hit. There's so much better rock music than this. But you know, the big story, it's Nashville country. And maybe it's just because of the 4th of July, or the adjustment that gave radio a little bit more prioritization in the tracking week, or just a lull on the charts, but we had a surge here. We didn't have much by Justin Moore at 75, Waves by Luke Bryan at 74, Country Again by Thomas Rhett at 71, Drunk and I Don't Want to Go Home by Elle King and Miranda Lambert at 63, Chasing After You by Ryan Hurd and Maren Morris at 62, Glad You Exist by Dan and Shay at 35, and Single Saturday Night by Cole Swindell at 26. But what's truly galling are our two continued gains, and for different reasons. One is Drinkin' Beer Talkin' God Amen by Chase Rice featuring Florida Georgia Line at 40. I mean, it's bad, but Nashville threw radio traction behind it. My only hope is that it fades as rapidly as it's written, which is very possible. What scares me is Fancy Like by Walker Hayes at 20. Again, this doesn't have radio yet. The sales are just that strong outside of its streaming. This is becoming a thing. I would like that to stop. But that's also the thing. There's a lot of country flooding into our new arrivals this week. And we gotta start with number 95, Cold Beer Calling My Name by Jameson Rodgers featuring Luke Combs.
Song humming and the sunset's doing this thing. Feeling lucky as a 7, yeah, sometimes heaven.
So I guess we're gonna keep on giving Jameson Rodgers a career. Full disclosure, I remember covering Some Girls, but I can't remember the slightest thing about it. So bringing in Luke Combs for a backup does kind of make sense on an EP that's literally called In It For The Money. And honestly, this seems about as generic and forgettable, especially as Luke Combs really overshadows Rodgers in terms of vocal texture and presence effortlessly. Honestly, it kind of feels like a Luke Combs song, down to the meatier guitars, the slightly more balanced production, although why the hand clap is here I've got no idea, and the content that's in very relax, get a beer and chill territory. I don't know, country's been cranking out songs like this with better tunes and stronger hooks for decades now, and I'm not really sure why Luke Combs didn't just cut this himself. It has the feel of throwing a favor to a newer act on the bill, and said favor might have backfired. So yeah, let's just move on. Number 91, I Was on a Boat That Day by Old Dominion.
For the weekend or the rest of my life, was she laughing, was she crying as she walked away? I can't say. I was on a boat that day.
Okay, look, I know there's an audience that sticks up for Old Dominion, including my little sister who has actually seen them live, but there's always been a weird hollowness to some of their sound that prevents me from really getting into them. And thus with this, well, you know, it does have a little more character, but I'm not sure that's a good thing. For one, this falls into the territory of, I'm getting dumped, but what the hell, so let's go goof off, which can kind of feel a little bit callous if it's not played all that right, and given how ramshackle and nonchalant the song feels, it's got some of that old dickish energy that's always permeated Old Dominion's least likable songs. Thankfully, the execution does save this from being considerably worse. All the accordion, the choppy but generally warm strumming of the acoustic line, the mostly organic production, the fact that this feels like a wholesale Zac Brown band ripoff minus all the vocal harmonies, but you know, if that band's not going to be good or interesting in the immediate future, we might as well get something. But still, this is just just obnoxious enough that I can tell if it's gonna stick around, I'm gonna turn on this really fast. It's not bad now, I dare say it's even tolerable. It will likely get worse. Just saying. Number 90, You Should Probably Leave by Chris Stapleton.
Hey, so you should probably leave. Yeah, you should probably leave.
I honestly don't know how much there is for me to say about this one. When I heard the album, it was an obvious highlight and also an obvious single. And while it took forever for Nashville radio to start pushing this, I'm really happy it's here. Dave Cobb's production and his impeccable mastering gives the song just terrific smolder in between Chris Stapleton and his wife Morgane and her backing vocals. The lead electric melody hits some legit soul off the touches of organ. But what I really love is just how well the bass is balanced. It's not overbearing, but always that supple foundation. Maybe Dave Cobb's figured out how to mic a bass line properly for once. And I like how playful the song is. He's gently pushing her away, but the flirtatious moments highlight real chemistry as they wind up together for that night. And personally for me, I listened to this song a ton when I was first dating my last partner. It just sets the vibe tremendously well, let me tell you. So Mercury Nashville, you got your work cut out for you. You have a legit fantastic song. Make it count. Number 83, A-OK by Verdes.
Head up in outer space. I know I'll be A-OK. I know I'll be A-OK.
I've been hearing buzz about Verdes for a while now. Off and on, I've seen comments saying that he's someone I should really check out, especially his album from this year. And his story is kind of interesting. He's been struggling to catch a break, so he went on an MTV dating show. He wound up winning it. He took the prize money, used it in order to cut the record, and then wound up going viral on TikTok just last year. So with this new song, well, I am considerably less impressed. Because wow, this reminds me of the sort of commercial core that ate indie pop alive 4 or 5 years ago, down to the heavily overdubbed vocals, the chipper acoustic guitar, the sterling clean production, and that relentless upbeat optimism that's a lot less Andy Grammer and more a desperate attempt to force a smile by the second verse. If anything, it does kind of remind me a little of Sunday Best by Surfaces from last year, but with a slightly more organic vibe, because at least there's some veneer of forced irony here. And yeah, the writing is really clunky, down to him calling himself a G, I don't believe him, and his terrible, horrible, no good, very bad days. But honestly, it feels closer to a kid's song, especially with the melody and presentation, except for all the swearing, which doesn't match any sort of vibe and kind of really sours this on me. I don't know who the audience for this is outside of maybe TikTok and Gen Z, but it certainly isn't me. Again, this is one of those songs that if overplayed will burn themselves out on me very fast. As of now, mediocre, but it's gonna get worse. I just know it. Number 82, Essence by Wizkid featuring Tems.
You don't need no other body. Only you feel on my body. Only you feel on my body.
You know, for as often as I see Wizkid trending on social media given his global success, I'm a little bit surprised he hasn't seen more chart penetration in the States. I mean, One Dance was in 2016. I have to hope that nobody's going back to that era of Drake. We want something new from Wizkid. But here's a song from his album from last year that's more straight Afrobeat, and, well, the song's as much of a showcase for Tems as it is Wizkid, who I'll admit I don't quite like as much with his more nasal singing against the bassy patter of percussion, the very spare melody, and all the echoing shouts and taps across the mix. The song is trying to go for a dance-ready smolder in order to complement some of the trumpet, and I think Wizkid hits that vibe a little bit more effectively with his verse. But I can't really say I'm wild about this, mostly because of Tems' hook, but also because it just feels so stripped back to a fault, so lacking in a stronger tune that it just doesn't give me much to work with beyond the vocals and some nice percussion. It's not bad, I don't mind it, but it doesn't really strike me as all that memorable, at least as much as I would like it to be. That's all. Number 81, Cry No More by Herbo featuring Polo G and Lil Tjay.
I don't wanna cry no more. I don't wanna cry no more.
Well, this is just a matter of time. Given the increasing rise of trap and drill in the rougher Chicago scene, just be a matter of time before Herbo got the proper full push in order to rival his peers in the city like Lil Durk and Polo G, the latter of whom's on the song. I'll admit I'm a little surprised it's taken this long. I remember Herbo having hype back in the mid-2010s before he got signed to a major, but with this as not even a single that he's pushing from the new album, I was curious how well it would work. It's pretty decent, but I get why it might be getting more attention for the guest stars than Herbo, given that he only has one verse here, and he almost seems like a guest star, less of a presence than Polo G on the hook and Lil Tjay's verse and ad-libs. Granted, I'm not sure it's all that helped by his writing, not being all that distinctive in comparison with the peers. A little shakier and shallower in how he constructs his bars, and the blur of gunplay and angst does need a little bit more to really grip me, especially with the pianos and the very stiff trap clicking. As much as I don't mind this sound, I'm starting to find myself looking for that extra bit to really put it over the top, and I'm not hearing it here. I mean, it's not bad, but I'm not sure this is a memorable song. Gotta say it. Number 73, Renegade by Big Red Machine featuring Taylor Swift.
Damage me, carry your baggage up my street, make me your future history. It's time.
So one thing I was kind of worried about with Taylor Swift's folk pivot last year was that she brought in a lot of veterans from the indie scene to help her make those albums, but that could potentially be as far as it all went, which happens for a lot of A-list artists who take what they need to make more hits and leave a trail of frustrated artists who thought they had their big break on the outside looking in. Look at Drake's career, there's a lot of them. So I will admit, I was legit shocked when Taylor Swift threw all of her support behind Big Red Machine, the collaboration project between Aaron Dessner of The National and Justin Vernon of Bon Iver. They actually put out an album in 2018 that I remember getting precisely zero hype or real attention, but it looks like this sophomore album is set to release in August doesn't just have multiple Taylor Swift credits, but also Ben Howard and Sharon Van Etten, and even Fleet Foxes on it, a much more involved affair. Hell, they got a charting single this time. I heard it was legit good, and yeah, it absolutely is. It plays to a slightly faster, brighter, and more lush tempo than what Taylor Swift's albums were, but in terms of the instrumental palette, it's very much in that territory. A lot of liquid guitars, mellotron, a sputtering drum machine playing off the synth bass, Taylor Swift's huskier vocals playing against Justin Vernon's lower register. I'm happy he's using that, not his falsetto, and the emotional complexity that I really like from the both of them. It is that tough point of those in relationships who like to tough it out and go it alone, and trying to untangle whether or not the flailing distance is more of a defense mechanism brought upon by real trauma or just real antipathy, and how much any of that really matters to a partner who's losing patience despite their best efforts to provide affection, especially when that partner is getting hurt as well. I like how angular and jagged the song feels, where nobody's precisely likable but very human, and there's a lot of reality to this scene that's got a lot of layers. That being said, I'm not quite over the moon with this. It doesn't quite have the climax of a song like Exile, and once that groove locks in, the swell of strings doesn't quite do enough to make this hit harder for me. Don't get me wrong, it is really good, and it's got me curious to check out whatever the hell Big Red Machine turns out to be for that album later, but even then it feels a little bit more like Taylor Swift's song than theirs, and as such it's good. It could have been great though. Just saying. Number 49, Wastin' Time by Brent Faiyaz featuring Drake.
Wasted with me.
I'm not sure where to start with this one. Is it the long overdue Brent Faiyaz push with the Drake cosign and the Neptunes on production? Or do we highlight that outside of Drake rapping over the remix of Lemon, he's never really worked with the Neptunes all that much, which could make for an interesting experiment going forward, a big change in his sound? Well, I hate to say it sounds exactly what you would think it would, but it kinda does. The elegant strings, they do work off of Pharrell's more distinctive snares and the chalky hi-hats and lumpy bass, and Brent Faiyaz dropping into a delicately layered couple verses and a very gentle hook as he tries to coax this girl to waste her time with him instead of all the other guys around her, including giving her all the space he needs. He comes across like a pretty nice guy. And then Drake shows up to step over all of the lines when it comes to how much space he thinks this girl really has. Faiyaz? Why are you spying on her ex-roommate and meandering through your usual state of paranoia when midway through your verse, you're trying to call out her passive aggression and how she feels like she's being attacked, which according to you, in between bragging about all the cars you put her in, that's just part of being in a relationship with you? Way to kill the vibe, Drake. I'm beginning to think that the cars and all that added social media clout and attention, they aren't worth all of your baggage. Kinda shame, because the rest of the song with Brent Faiyaz is really good. And if they chose to remix this, maybe get rid of Drake's verse altogether, honestly my mind goes to Black immediately. He'd sound great on this. But believe it or not, I think Big Sean would sound good on this too, especially if he brought along Jhené Aiko. Now, if just Jhené showed up, I'd be fine with that too. Someone should get on that. And finally, number 14, Am I the Only One by Aaron Lewis.
Take a bullet for being free. Screaming what the fuck at my TV for telling me, yeah, you're telling me.
I feel I need to preface this with something I have said before. I didn't have an angry white boy phase. By extension, I jumped right past mainstream rock radio into metal, so I missed the entire wave of the early to mid 2000s that did not get pop crossover, and as such, I only came back to hear those acts later, and I have no nostalgia, so while I might get some of those defenses of Stained, this band sucked. Especially when they started getting rock radio play, and I don't even think those defenders are coming around for their frontman Aaron Lewis doing his milquetoast outlaw country shtick, which has attracted some very mixed reviews from the country fans who gave him a chance on record, and even less so for his live show, notorious for being lazy, hectoring, and increasingly overloaded with self-aggrandizing jingoism. Now I want to stress, I haven't had to care about any of this. Stained hasn't put out an album in a decade. I don't actively seek out any of this music, and since it doesn't chart, I was content to leave it moldering among his dwindling relevance. But then this happened. For context, it's charting on simply massive sales, a bit of streaming, and nothing else. Like most charting songs from the right, I don't expect it to have a lot of lasting presence, although it is interesting to see the difference between Tom MacDonald doing this on his own with no label versus this having the might of Big Machine and Valerie behind it. And as for the song itself, well, of course it's bad, but in a very different way. With Tom MacDonald, you can at least laugh at how much he tries to frame his reactionary nonsense with something in the vague area code of logic and a little bit of deeper thought. But with Aaron Lewis, it's just sad and kind of pathetic. There's literally lines about him turning into his dad and shouting at his TV, all against a mostly acoustic backdrop that doesn't match all of his cursing at all. Honestly, when it starts circling around very broad, jingoistic statements about bleeding for the flag, and then cussing out the kids tearing down what his generation built, all circling around feelings that it's all disrespecting the troops, it feels like a very inarticulate shout of Fox News-fueled rage that he can't quite conceptualize or contextualize or explain, which makes the details he has very telling. I mean, the statues coming down were those erected commemorating the Confederacy decades after it, built very badly to reinforce Jim Crow. So if you're screaming about disrespecting the flag, shouldn't you be happy that the traitors are losing their idols? But then there's that line on the bridge, where he quits singing along whenever he hears a Bruce Springsteen song. And it's not even because he finally grasped the satire of Born in the USA. This apparently was because he heard about Bruce Springsteen on Barack Obama's podcast. I mean, kind of shocking you didn't know the blue-collar kid from New Jersey who's been writing these themes his entire career wasn't a Republican, but again, that's fooled a lot of people with Born in the USA. But more importantly, on the one hand, you have celebrated heartland rock icon Bruce Springsteen. On the other, you have the former frontman of Stain. Aaron Lewis, if you're asking me to make a choice, you lose. But what saddens and scares me a bit is that to a lot of people who only get their news from one source and never bother to check for more, Aaron Lewis's rage is familiar. It's unfocused, it's reactionary, it's attempting macho bravado, and it's deeply misinformed, but there's a lot of white people for which this might as well be their monologue. Ideally, a song like this goes no further. Let's hope the kids make sure of that. And yeah, obviously he's getting the worst this week. But I think I'm going to give dishonorable mention to A-OK by Tjay Verdes. The kids aren't all alright, because there's something very cloying about the presentation that really rubs me the wrong way with this. I really hope it does not pick up steam. But the best this week overshadows all of this handily, with the honorable mention going to Renegade by Big Red Machine featuring Taylor Swift, and the best, You Should Probably Leave by Chris Stapleton. Just an awesome song. I really hope it sticks around. I've got that personal connection to it. Next week, well, odds are there's going to be another BTS track debuting quite high, but it looks like we're slowing down a little bit for the summer. No album bombs in sight. Stay tuned to see if I wind up being wrong on that, but until then, I'm Mark. You're watching Billboard Breakdown, affiliated with Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.